Welcome to another episode. Today I'll explain what a conflict of interest is and why it can potentially occur everywhere in every human interaction. About conflicts of interest you hear mainly in news programs, in the context of scandals and mismanagement or corruption. This particular context interests us the least. However, quickly you will understand what it is about too, because the mechanism is the same in every case. Certainly you have heard the statement that someone has an interest or that something is not in their best interest. It is a matter to settle, benefit, advantage, or undertaking, bringing material benefit. A conflict of interest is a situation where parties have opposing interests, meaning they compete with each other. Even something as trivial as choosing a movie to watch with your girlfriend at the cinema can be a source of conflict, especially later in the relationship. Your interest. You, dear man, want to watch, say, a sci-fi film with good special effects because it brings you joy. Her interest. Your girlfriend, for example, wants a romantic comedy because that genre makes her happier. And boom, an argument is ready. Do you recognize this situation from your own experience? This example is trivial, and the potential consequences of such a conflict might just be a few hours of sulking. But there are situations where the consequences can be measured in hundreds of thousands, or even millions. A moment for those who like a bit of a history and strategy. Are you ready? I hope you are. You have to know that. A good example here is the year 2014 and the Crimean conflict. What were the interests of the Russian Federation that it decided to conduct such an operation? What is so important in Crimea, meaning on territory of a foreign country? Because that the Black Sea Fleet is not simply located in Sevastopol. This is not some local foreign base, some area surrounded by a fence based on some agreement, as often happens in the world. The Black Sea Fleet is scattered across the whole coast. Therefore, the whole Crimea is needed. The Kremlin's interest for now concentrates on Sevastopol, the main base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in Crimea. Sevastopol is a naval war base, no less dear to Russian hearts than Portsmouth and Plymouth to the British or Pearl Harbor. Russia decided and sent to Crimea the little green men. Everything indicates that the strategic goal or interest was the Black Sea Fleet, meaning military force as an instrument of politics needed to impose one's opinion and interest by force. The Russian diaspora in Ukraine was only an excuse or justification. If someone believes in this reason, then of course has such right. However, then suggests itself the question why the little green men didn't appear in other countries where the Russian diaspora is equally numerous. For example, USA, Belarus, Great Britain. On the example of Crimea is clearly visible that true intentions can be and often are hidden. Which is obvious, because hiding one's intentions increases chances of success. This is obvious for a military man, meaning an expert on conflicts. What's more, this is one of fundamental issues of military art. Surprise. Because it minimizes the effort that is needed to achieve the goal, just like in the animal kingdom, so in the human world. To notice a conflict of interest, you must know what the other side cares about. You must recognize their interest. Interest always exists where there is value for the other side. In the previous episode, I explained what value is. Motives for action don't always have to directly connect with money, but always connect according to the definition of benefit. The benefit can be, for example, improving mood, well-being. In next episodes will be material where I will discuss what are the basic motives for action of every human, regardless whether he is conscious of it or not. It's worth knowing this, because awareness of one's own motives for action allows understanding the choices we make, to recognize them in the future, and make appropriate decisions. And additionally, their awareness in oneself leads to better understanding of them in others. Here are examples of conflicts of interest in everyday life. There are multitudes of them. Here are a few of them. A dishonest car commission agent or dealer hides defects of a car that he wants to sell. He does this because in his interest lies obtaining the highest possible price for the sold car. Revealing all shortcomings of the car will cause reduction of its usefulness for the buyer. Who would want to buy defective goods paying normal price? The buyer's interest is to pay the lowest possible price. Therefore, in the buyer's interest is finding the largest possible number of hidden or obvious shortcomings of the potentially purchased car. To use this information for price negotiations, rightly claiming that repairs entail costs which raise the total purchase cost or present arguments which supposedly cause that the usefulness of this car is smaller than it might seem. For example, the car is blue, while the buyer is looking generally for a car in white color, etc. However, one must know that this most often is also not entirely truthful, because if the value of such car in the buyer's eyes was actually inadequate to the price and would be additionally very distant from it, and the color actually was an obstacle, impossible to reconcile, then such conversation and negotiations wouldn't happen at all, because the buyer most ordinarily in the world wouldn't want to waste time on this at all. Of course, the attitude of the buyer who tries to maximally lower the price is also far from saintly, because in majority of cases he could pay a higher price but tries to make an impression of lower value than he actually assigns to the example car. There's no point getting angry at reality, simply such are the rules of the game. Conflict of interest in family or relationships can have various faces. For example, when spouses have different visions regarding raising children. One spouse wants to raise children in a spirit of strict discipline, the other in a stress-free way, without setting any boundaries. Both these goals mutually exclude themselves and cannot be reconciled, and both spouses vision such upbringing methods bring greater benefits, therefore they prefer them. Both sides insisting on their position and lack of achieving some mutual concessions guarantees conflict, because such matter will have much greater value than, for example, choice of a movie screening. Finally, in case of divorce, appears already an open and impossible to hide conflict of interests. The spouse's interest is primarily division of potential assets and securing financial transfers in form of, for example, alimony, and keeping the largest possible custody over children. If the spouses are able to peacefully agree about these matters, then the most comfortable situation for them. Otherwise, we have all premises needed for conflict, meaning competition over limited resources, because there is a finite number of children in the family, and the worked out assets also have limited and finite value. Even if at the beginning of a relationship people's or players' interests are convergent, then unfortunately there is no guarantee that with time preferred values won't change, which in result may end, for example, in a court battle, or that true intentions were kept hidden in order to mislead the other side. An example of this are matrimonial scammers, whose real goals are different than declared, and unknowing partners, women or men, fall into traps of such scammers. I guarantee that such people perfectly know topics that we discuss here and use them with full premeditation. Conflict of interest is such an important topic that in Roman law, meaning one of foundations of our civilization, was created the principle, he who benefits did it. It indicates that in case of a crime, the one who committed it certainly had to gain something from it. This narrows the circle of potential suspects, because if someone had no reason, so-called motive, and gained nothing from it, probably didn't commit the crime. This is very logical reasoning, because, would you, listener, reach to the fridge for a snack or meal if you had no need to eat? Or would you go to the store for a new computer if the old one works and fulfills its tasks? Or would you consider revenge if your values or boundaries weren't crossed? Probably not. Let's mention it again. Examples of conflicts of interest in daily life. Dishonest car dealer. His interest, getting the highest price for the car. Tactic, hiding defects. Revealing flaws would lower the car's usefulness to the buyer. Buyer's interest, paying the lowest price. Tactic, finding as many faults as possible to negotiate the price down. Family and relationships. Parenting conflicts. One spouse wants strict discipline, the other prefers no rules. These goals are mutually exclusive. Divorce. Open conflict over assets, alimony, and child custody. If no agreement, it escalates into legal battles. Lack of occurring conflicts of interest today doesn't mean that such state will last forever. It could, but only in a situation where people's or players' goals will always be convergent with each other and never change, or when never will occur jointly opposing interests. If interests are common, then there are no reasons for betrayal or acting to harm. Conflicts cannot be avoided because there is always some interest. You must learn to recognize when they occur. This usually sooner or later becomes obvious, when fighting starts and losses start being suffered. Therefore, the best way to deal with conflict is recognizing still potential conflict before it actually occurs. Assessing probability of its occurrence, meaning risk, if possible, preparing for it beforehand or avoiding it altogether. But to recognize them, you must know and must be aware of their existence. That is all for now. Till the next time.